Welcome back, John. I'm so excited to with you again. You're the first guest so far who came on twice. How are you today?
I'm doing good. And I just want to thank you so much for creating this space. For those of you who are listening with us today, this all came about because we had a little conversation after we recorded, and we talked about this amazing thing that's coming up in June of just about every year since I think, 1969. And you invited me to come back and chat a little bit about this. So I'll be the one to let you tell everyone what we're talking about.
Yes, yes, yes. So we're talking about Pride Month. I did Google it a little bit so that I'm
Mhm.
not an ignorant idiot here. But tell me, what does it? Well, let's say first, what does it mean for you personally, and then
Mhm.
what does it mean to the gay and LGBTQ community in general?
Well, I'll start with a little story about the first Pride that I ever went to when I was in my 20s. And, most people in the LGBTQ community, for a while thought about Pride as like a place where we just come together and we party. And I was actually volunteering for an HIV organization at the time, and they were walking in the parade. And usually there is a parade, which, really honors all of the different aspects of the community. And I went, and as I was walking down the street, at first I was a little bit anxious, a little bit nervous. This was me publicly being a queer person. And
Mhm.
then as we walked down and like people were applauding and cheering, and I was walking with my fellow volunteers, there was this thing inside my heart that just radiated that there was so much power in our community coming together. And ever since then, that's really what this month of June is about. It's about looking at who we are, the diversity in our community, where we've come from, where we still have to grow, and just recognize the incredible power that exists in the LGBTQ world.
Yeah, and I feel like um so I grew up in Switzerland, so maybe that's also why I'm not so aware of this Pride Month. I'm not sure whether they did this back when I was still living in Switzerland, because I actually had friends from the LGBTQ community. I was invited to parties with people like this. I saw the full color range of them, and I feel they bring so much joy. And these parades, I feel too, sometimes they bring so much joy. And then in Switzerland, we have a thing that's called street parade. I don't know whether you heard about that. It's actually not for the necessarily for the LGBTQ community, but it is like a techno parade where they have these floats and they play techno music. But a lot of queer people are being attracted to, because you can be the paradise bird basically
Mhm.
there, and it's all normal, and it's a huge party. And usually I guess now with COVID they can't do it still this year, but before it was the most peaceful party ever. And you can Google it. I mean, it's amazing. And so I feel like we need to show our like, also us not queer people need to show more our colorful things. So yeah,
Mhm.
for that I feel so I feel it's very special that we can do this, but it's also
Yeah.
in a way sad that we need special months to be putting awareness on this. No, it have a second side to the coin.
Well, I think the thing that's important to understand, though, so you talk about the fun, playful party side of like the gathering that you go to, and I'm kind of like, ooh, let's go next year. Um, but it's also understanding that here in the U.S., I mean, the whole idea of this came from a very painful part of our LGBTQ history. We're looking back in 1969 at the Stonewall riots, and just kind of like a little brief nuggety look at that is during that time all over the US, it was very common for, any place where LGBTQ people were gathered, whether it was a bar, or a social club, for the police to harass the people who would attend. Sometimes they would actually raid the bars.
Mhm.
Sometimes they would just be outside and harass people as they were trying to leave quietly, minding their own business.
Mhm.
So in 1969, there was a raid on the Stonewall Inn, and the people who were there were like, this is not okay. And especially led by some of the transgender community, a riot took place. And
Mhm.
in that moment, it was a definition of saying, no, this a type of abuse and harassment is no longer okay. This type of assault on our community is no longer okay. And that really is seen as part of, the history of where Pride began. So it comes from, a social response. It comes from, more of an anger-filled riot place experience, but it is that transition, especially here in the US, into seeing the LGBTQ community as part of the fabric of society.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I mean with the sad side of the whole coin, and not just sad, but also like sh- that we even have to talk about this. I find sometimes, like if you go all the way to the core, that we even have to talk about this, that it's not okay to harass somebody just for either their sexual orientation, their skin color, their whatever, that's
Mhm.
kind of the sad part. But I feel like um, it needs both. So that's why I'm saying I like the colorfulness, because we need the light-hearted thing to bring to the people, no, with the heavy-hearted stuff
Mhm.
to get their awareness. Maybe that's kind of how I feel about it. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, and I think there's an interesting balance that plays out as well too, in the idea that, Pride began from that place. We are here, we are powerful, we are a community to be recognized with, to turning into, a support access network for times during the HIV and AIDS crisis, to then
Yeah.
moving forward into starting to create more support for the trans community, which has been marginalized quite deeply. And even here in the US right now, is fighting dramatically for their right to exist on a day-to-day basis. And
Yeah.
so the community has evolved and changed with it over the years. There were some periods where it's just been a big dance party, and
hmm
sometimes that's okay. But there's
Yeah.
definitely been a return back to the activism of it,
hmm
as we look at LGBTQ rights being questioned, especially here in the US.
hmm hmm But I do feel there is more awareness now, or is that just me? Because I'm kind of like now in your influence, but I do feel like I just saw Instagram now introduced that you can say whether you are a she or a he or a they or a them, and
Mhm.
all these things like that. Is that progress in your eyes, or is this just band-aids?
I think it's interesting because yes, it is definitely progress. And I am one of those people in the community who sees any step in the right direction as progress. I am more of a let me invite you into the conversation to make you aware versus like a militant person who's going to scream at
hmm
you that this has to happen. The
hmm
thing that's really important to understand is there is a need for both of those types of voices and everything in
hmm
between in the community as we advocate for change.
Yeah.
But I think it is powerful to understand that, most people are just walking through their lives and want to love whoever they love. They want to love their neighbors and they want to connect. But there is still a very small yet vocal minority who believes that LGBTQ people do not have the right to exist, to love who they want to love, and to walk through the world. And
Mm,
so, as long as that vocal minority exists, we are still going to have to be aware and we're going to have to take social stands to
yeah,
make change happen in the world.
yeah, yeah. So well said, because I believe too it needs both. It needs the activists, the loud ones that I'm not for violence, but and it's not about violence, but sometimes you have to aggressively and assertively stand here and say it, and then the other ones who show more and with love and everything. But so, what would you say is the best way for us not queer people? Is that the correct way to say it? Not
That
queer.
works.
um, to be a positive ally for or in general, to like, because I don't know, like I have no objections. I feel like, but I feel like it could be similar with the Black Lives Matter movement, where if you don't say anything, you're still kind of like not helping the cause. And so
Mhm.
here I'm thinking it might be similar. So how can we be a good ally or a good helper?
Well, I think it's about looking in our own circles and our own communities and not passively just sitting by when there's a joke made. It's like,
Mhm.
wow, he's so gay. Or, wow, can you believe, what Harry Styles wore on the cover of whatever magazine? Like, wow, what a faggot. And to actually say, no, that language is not okay around me. One of the ways that I approach it in any situation like that, whether it affects me or it affects somebody else that might be in the community, is I will always say, hey, I just want you to know that something you just said could be offensive to someone in this room. And I just
Mhm.
want to encourage you to look at the need to use that kind of language. Once
Mhm.
again, I approach from this very kind of Zen-like approach. And that is partially because of who I am. I'm a yoga teacher, a spiritual person, a mindfulness teacher. So all of that's part of my way of being. But when we stand passively by and let any minority,
Mhm.
be spoken of in derogatory terms, we are signing up for that. We are
Yeah.
tacitly agreeing with those words.
Yeah.
If someone says something about you as a female and I just sit by and
Mhm.
let them joke about that,
Mhm.
I'm agreeing to that.
Yeah.
And I need to be willing to step up and say, like, hey, it's not okay to talk about Connie like that. She is a powerful person in this world. She's
Yeah.
reaching out to try and create change. And so we need to be willing to step up when we hear that type of buzz around us and just say that it's not okay.
Yeah, I agree. But it's sometimes we're not. Um, so I definitely wasn't raised to speak up. I was more raised to just don't get involved. It's none of your business. Kind of like that's how I got raised, and not. I mean, not necessarily in relation only to the queer community, but just in general. Like if you see something and it's not your business, don't say anything. But I think that is exactly where this happens, that we let things go sour, no? Because even people who don't agree with what's happening are just standing back and not saying anything. I think
Mhm.
this is also the message of um a
Well, the
lot
thing
of
is that I know from my personal experience that most of the people that I encounter in the world are just kind, beautiful, loving
yes.
people. Okay.
Hmm.
Like I said earlier, there's this very vocal minority that's,
Hmm.
screaming about how awful it is for, trans kids to want to use the bathroom that's affirming to their gender, how
Yeah.
awful it is that I, as a queer person, am married. Okay. There's a
Hmm.
small majority that's very vocal and screaming that. But I'll
Hmm.
tell you this, the other side exists too. Um, in my neighborhood, there are all these wonderful, beautiful people around me. And when we first moved in, you could kind of like, oh, two guys are moving in. And then they realized, oh, they're a couple. And then after talking, oh, they're married.
Hmm.
But our neighborhood is so beautiful and so affirming. When the kid across the way is selling pies for Thanksgiving for their school, they come to us just as people who live in the neighborhood,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
the gay guys, not the weird people, but just two people
Yeah.
who are part of the neighborhood. And
Yeah.
I experience so much of that in my world. And that's the voice, this experience that I think we need to amplify a little bit more,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
this vocal minority who's very anti-LGBTQ is grabbing the airwaves. They make good news. That
Hmm.
somebody screaming into a camera like gets ratings up.
Yeah.
But like you and I having this conversation right now, this is that simple, beautiful, sharing, caring energy. And that exists so much in our world on so many levels for everything,
Yeah.
that how can we get this experience amplified, heard
Yeah.
more, so that people understand that, wow, this is so powerful when we are just loving and kind to each other. And this is on all levels.
Yeah, and it should be just normal. I feel, and I don't like the should word, but I literally believe it should just be normal. I mean, yeah, yeah, but yeah, no, it's true. And you mentioned before about me being a woman. I mean, I don't want to compare myself with the queer community, which probably has it harder. But I can relate, because as a woman, I experienced a lot of situations where just because I was a woman, I wasn't supposed to do something, or I wasn't allowed to do something, or I was ridiculed, or I was not taken seriously. And this is where I'm coming from. I'm saying, like, it just should be normal, that what you experience in your neighborhood, or that I can express myself and do whatever I want in my life, like career-wise, without being judged by this minority still. And it's always the minorities that make the headlines. Now, that's what a lot of people forget. We think then sometimes this is how the world is, but this is not how the world is. This is not just the ones that are the noisiest. No.
Well, yeah, and if you think about it, like if you and I have a really beautiful, powerful moment that's based on peace and kindness, that doesn't really make headlines. It
Yeah,
doesn't.
exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
news channels are based on ratings, so that's what's going to get the most coverage. And I
Mm,
think it's also important too, you know, bringing this idea of, you know, you mentioned Black Lives Matters, you mentioned, you know, like women's empowerment, that
mm,
all of these things, I think we need to be really careful not to make it comparative, you
mm.
know, that
Yeah,
one person is going this, we're
exactly.
comparing ourselves to each other.
Exactly.
What I think it's the thing of being aware that there are all these aspects of people that are feeling marginalized, and how can we affirm each other in that process?
Hmm.
Rather than trying to say, I have it better or worse than you, it's like, how can I be part of your journey right now and help in the process? Because
Yeah.
that joining together, that's what pride is about. That's
Mm,
actually why you see, you know, on the 50th anniversary, like watching thousands and thousands of people from all over the world march down the streets of New York carrying this enormous, you know, like blocks long pride flag that they, you know, unfolded and they took these aerial shots of. That's
mhm,
pride. That's us coming together and really creating this bigger story, this bigger, you know, version of care and love.
mhm. Yeah, I agree. Beautiful words. Now, let's take things a little closer. So, we just talked about how, in general, we can help. Now, what if, for example, we're a family and one of our children discovers that they are gay or lesbian or transgender?
Mhm.
How do we best support them in that?
Mhm. Well, you know, at the most basic level, I always like to say for parents, when that moment happens, your kid's been thinking about it for quite a while, and they are suddenly becoming brave enough to bring it out to you. And I don't know if you've ever looked online, but there are all these kids who are filming their coming out moments with their parents. And the
Mm,
ones that are always the most successful are the ones where the kid, heart beating fast, anxiety, sweaty, you know, really nervous, says the words, let's say in my example, I'm gay, and all the parent does is open their arms, hug them close, and say, I love you.
mhm,
Right there, that's the most powerful foundational moment in any family. To not try and process it, to not be like, well, what do you mean you're gay? What is this? Blah, blah, blah. But
mhm,
instead, affirm that they are still a beautiful, powerful part of the family. A lot of
mhm,
times you hear the word acceptance thrown around, and
mhm.
I have a personal cause to get rid of that word of I accept you for being gay. Because the word accept in its foundation actually says there's something wrong with you, but I'm going to
Yeah,
overlook it. So
yeah.
I'd rather encourage parents to affirm, to embrace, to love as a
Mhm,
way to begin the journey and the foundation of their kid being able to come out. And the other
mhm,
thing that's changing, there's this really cool thing that's being out in the community right now. It's not just about coming out, it's also about coming in. So when your kid speaks the words, I'm gay, I'm bisexual to you, they're actually inviting you in.
mhm.
So
Beautiful.
let's also look at that part of it. Your honor as a parent is to suddenly be invited deeper into your kid's world. Let's
Mhm.
honor that. Let's learn from that. Let's be present with that. Because that's a really exciting moment for any parent and kid to go through together.
Yeah, that just gave me the chills. That is so true. Like literally, like yeah, they're invited in, and especially in these like if they're teenagers, like you always hear. And so I'm not a parent, so but I always hear like it's hard to get to your child when they're going through the teenage years because they also by nature need to become more independent, but it's hard for the parent. And so if your child tells you something like this, they're literally inviting you into their world. And
Mhm.
yeah, this is very powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
And
And
you know,
so,
remember too that as a parent, you are going to have very strong feelings about this moment. You are. And it's important to understand that you as a parent are also going to go through your own process. But
Mhm.
I always encourage parents not to do that process with their kids.
Yeah.
But instead, go to your spouse, go to a therapist, go to an
Mhm.
LGBTQ parent support group,
Mhm.
talk out your feelings, do some research online, read about what this language your kid is sharing with you means, process your feelings so that you can still be there with your kid on this journey. Because if
Mhm.
you try and process it with your kid, it's like no kid should be your therapist.
Yeah, no, I agree. And especially the person who is in the situation shouldn't have to deal with your insecurities or your whatever struggles in your head, no, because they have enough to do with themselves and
Yeah.
they need your support. Yeah.
Yeah. And most parents, I like to point this out both to the kids I work with and the parents and families that I work with. There's this grieving process that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I like to describe it, it's not grieving because your kid has come out. It's grieving because when you gave birth to that child, you're in the hospital, you held in your arms, you looked in its eyes, and you projected forward this entire life journey for this kid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You figure them going to school, being the valedictorian, going to the prom, being the head of the football team,
Mm-hmm.
going to college, becoming a doctor, buying a house next door to yours, and having kids. Like parents project forward this entire lifetime for their children.
Mm-hmm.
And in
Mm-hmm.
that moment, when your kid comes out to you, that dream shatters.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we have to grieve. Because
Yeah.
if we can grieve that preconceived projection of what you saw your kid becoming, and instead meet them at this new place, then you can build together.
Yeah.
But I think in that moment, it's important to allow space for people to grieve.
Yeah, I agree. But it's interesting how you know how you mentioned this, because just this week on my podcast, the episode is called Permission to Grieve, and I'm talking with Shannon Takis, and we're talking about how grieving is not really an accepted thing in our society oftentimes, and especially grieving something that didn't die. Like you just said, a dream died, yes, but it's not a person that died. So
Mhm.
like there is so much different grief that we need to process that is not necessarily tied to somebody physically dying. It's what you said, it's our projections that we had on the child, our dream, those are dying and we
Mhm.
have to grieve. But a lot of people are not very well equipped to even know how to grieve or to feel the feeling of grief without then judging themselves.
Mhm.
That's just a little side note here.
And I can't imagine that, they didn't also share about the idea that support is so important in those moments.
Yeah.
I always say to parents, let's see if we can connect you into the community with other parents who are going through this same moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because what's great about group process is that the parents going to walk in, maybe their kid just came out. There are going to be parents there who are at the exact same place they're at. There are going to be
Mm-hmm.
parents who are even, less along the path, and there are going to be parents who are farther along the path.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so those stories, those connections that like you're not alone, that your kid is coming out, really important for families. And I
Yeah.
also think it's important at the same time for kids to have access to community resources, whether it's a QSA at their school or being able to, create some online communities and have access there, that all of those things are important because in a moment where we're going through some big process like this, we often feel very alone and isolated. And that
Mm-hmm.
isolation is the thing that can make us go into depression or have anxiety or
Yeah.
turn to substance. And if we can create connectivity and support, that's one of the best ways that we can, push against this idea of the challenge that the kid is in.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful said. I have another episode about the power of community. It all ties together. It's really true. Now, a different question, twofold. So, if either you are the person who hasn't come out yet but are thinking about it, what would you tell that person? Or the second part of it is, if the environment around a person like that notices that they might be, how can they support that person? Should they say something or not? So it's kind of like
Okay, I'm
twofold
gonna go with the
question.
second part of the question first.
Okay.
Um, I am not in favor of outing other people.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, you may be like, oh, I think something's going on here, and I just want to ask
Mm-hmm.
them. sometimes that's going to cause more anxiety than it is to
Mm-hmm.
create space, because that person may not be ready to speak those words out loud.
Yeah.
So what you can do as that caring, supportive ally is make sure that the person knows that you are an ally. You know, you
Mm-hmm.
can talk openly about LGBTQ issues. You can do that thing we said earlier and speak up if someone
Mm-hmm.
says something that's like anti-trans or anti-bisexual,
Mm-hmm.
that you give an example of you're that person, you're an ally to the community,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be safe to come and talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then this goes back to that other piece of the puzzle, the question that you just asked. It is about, well, how do we choose to come out? And the thing is, people come out at all different ages. You know, I came
Yeah.
out when I was 16. I have a really good friend who came out when they were 41. People
Mm-hmm.
come out at all different ages. People do it when they are ready to speak those words out loud for themselves and affirm that
Mm-hmm.
identity.
Mm-hmm.
I do encourage, though, and anyone who's looking to do that, we have to also weigh out safety. We
Mm-hmm.
do have to look that, you know, especially in the last few years here in the US, anti-LGBTQ hate crimes have risen dramatically. An environment was set where it was okay to say that and do that again.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to always examine safety. And
Mm-hmm.
perhaps you choose to come out to a family member, but not come out to work. Maybe you come out to friends, but not in your church or spiritual community.
Mm-hmm.
There are layers and layers of it. And the other thing that's important to understand is that coming out is a lifelong process.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we having this conversation? Because my comfort with my queer identity is very deep and affirmed in me. And you and I are just chatting, like talked about this. And also you're like, oh, we need to talk about pride. There are other people who may or not be comfortable talking in a public medium about their queer identity.
Mm-hmm.
And it is important to respect the boundaries of that person rather than trying to be forceful. Create an environment where they could share with you if they felt they wanted to,
Mm-hmm.
but don't try and push the button.
Mm-hmm. You would say the same to a parent
Absolutely.
thinking about it?
Absolutely. And here's the thing. I mean, when we look at adolescent development and kid development, there are these incredibly powerful things that are going on when we're younger. We are developing our identity as a person. And part of that identity is pushing through the challenging moments and starting to affirm who we are in the world, whether it's our political beliefs, our spiritual beliefs, or things about our sexual orientation or gender identity. This is a powerful process for us to be able to go through. And
Mm-hmm.
this kind of brings a little sidebar conversation I'm going to throw in. And especially important when we think about Pride Month. So if I tell someone I'm gay, most people will say, oh, he sleeps with guys. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
put the identity only into what I do as a sexual being.
Yeah.
But what I want to suggest is what I just talked about. I have gone through a coming out process. I continually go through a coming out process. I'm often doing a lot of internal evaluation into my environment, the people I connect. What level of safety do I feel? Where am I at in my world about speaking openly about who I am? This
Mm-hmm.
is a process. This is a thing we call essentialism, that it is
Mm-hmm.
about the essence of who I am, that you as a cisgender, you know, heterosexual person may not have gone through.
Mm-hmm.
And to understand that there is so much more to my gay identity than just who I sleep with. It's about a lifetime of experience and internal study and selfness. And that, to me, is another big step that we can take in supporting the LGBTQ community, that this whole person, the experience that, you know, the LGBTQ people have gone through is part of the essence of who we are, and respecting that and being curious about that, not just about who I'm having sex with.
Yeah. Yeah, because we're kind of simplifying it then. No, it's like, oh yeah, this is just, and it's not that simple. Nothing is that
Mhm,
simple. No.
mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. I'm glad you took that little side.
Well, it's funny too, because as I was talking to you, I realized, you know, in some of our conversation, I mean, think about, you essentially have the learnings and teachings of where you grew up,
Mm-hmm.
but then you also changed where you lived. And so you had to go through a process of like, this is what I learned growing up. This is what my new, you know, community asked for me. You have gone through kind of a coming out, essential self-examined process.
Yeah.
And there are lots of those that we have in our lives. It's just important to recognize them in each other.
Yeah. And yes, you're right. And maybe other people do it in their own. So just like you just said, I grew up in Switzerland, moved to Canada. It's definitely different, and you have to go through a process. Other people may have too, and we should be more aware of it, that it's not just so simple, like you just said, that there is a lot involved with it. Yeah. So did I want to be mindful of your time too. So did I not ask something that you feel like is very important that we need to add to this conversation?
So anyone who's listening, one of the most powerful things you can do, whether you identify as cisgender or transgender or queer or heterosexual, is to show up at a pride event in your community.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about me and my community coming together. It's about you also being there and affirming and supporting and rubbing shoulders with an amazing, like 6'7" drag queen, and talking intimately with, a trans kid who's next to you, and being able to walk through, sometimes there are, fairs or gatherings afterwards, and see like the art of the community, see what the political organizations are that are looking for LGBTQ rights. All of these things, for someone who is not LGBTQ to show up, that's where the change can happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the power can show up. And I have to tell you, as a queer person, if you are next to me there and I know that you are not queer and you are there, I just want to hug you and hold you tight and thank you for that affirmation. That's
Mm-hmm.
really, really important.
Okay.
I don't need to fit into your world,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, I'm so honored when you choose to come and learn about mine.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a beautiful tip, and I have no problem. I will do this if they allow me, because I don't know, here in British Columbia we're still not allowed to gather, so I'm not sure it's going to be much different in June. Let's hope, but who knows? Yeah, no, beautiful insights and conversation, John. And I feel like it's very, very important. That's why I was so excited that you were willing to come back, because I noticed for myself, I'm not aware of enough. And so if I can help bring more awareness and more support out in the world, then I'm honored to do that.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, so now I know you're a therapist and you work with the LGBTQ community, you work with adolescents in the LGBTQ community. So brag a little bit where people can find you. I know you have a beautiful website. Last time you told me about your beautiful website. So tell us where they can find you if they would love to check you out and possibly enlist your support.
So you can find me at my main website, which is johnsovec.com, JOHNSOVEC.com. Also, if you are a parent of an LGBTQ kid, or you're an LGBTQ kid looking for some support, I have another website, gayteentherapy.com. You can also find me on Instagram, John Sovec Therapy, and on Twitter at John Sovec. And I really love and value having these conversations. So please feel free to reach out to me with questions, curiosities, looking for support in your community. And I will do my best to help you access that type of community care.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, John. I say it again, I'm very grateful and honored that you came on twice on my podcast. We have such good conversations. I could talk with you every day. We could have a daily podcast. But yeah, no, thanks so much, John, for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.